Okay, thank you guys for being here. Is everybody okay with the chairs? Or do you need to spread out and we can move some chairs out? What do you think? Do you feel comfortable? John, you're not uncomfortable between these two sweater people?
He's got red on. He fits right in.
We should take a Christmas card picture.
Oh, the green lady's really good.
It could be the Schultz extended family.
You got the nails.
All right, thanks everybody for being here. We normally don't have any meetings in December. We're going to record this meeting for two people who are traveling or out of town that can't be here. Kim is on her way. Some of you may already know that her husband had complete knee replacement yesterday. It was a 9-hour surgery, I believe. And so he's in recovery today, and she's trying to help him. So she's on her way as soon as she can get here. Yeah, but we had created this with her before, so we're all set to go. I appreciate getting together with all of you, and we had some comments with the supervisors probably a month or two ago. It's been at least 2 years since we had a chance to get together as a SABR or Lifestar group to do in-service or talk. I think the last thing we did as an entire group was Flagstaff. What year was that? 2019. I contacted Lifestar. Yeah, and that's too long. I mean, it's not. We need to get back on it. Make sure we're all on the same page, doing the same things, sort of collaborate. We've made a lot of programming changes, so we need to make sure everybody's up to date on that. The women knowing the men's stuff, the men knowing more of the women's stuff. Everybody collaborate. Hopefully next year we can get back to doing something more fun, where we get out and we can go up north and spend the weekend and do something. I did contact Lifestar in Salt Lake to see what they're doing. And it seems as though they're really moving more and more towards online, more universal kind of training and programming. They asked if it would be possible for us to host a live training at our office. So I said, we're open to that. We just need to let us know ahead of time. And so we're waiting to hear on that. But that's always a fun time for us to get together too with them. Different than ITAP, it's a lot more conservative and who attends Lifestar. So that's really great. Okay, so we've got some announcements to go over. We want to talk about some programming things today. I'm really sorry that we're late. John won't stop talking sometimes, and it just gets me behind. So here we are. First, quick announcement, CSAT hours. Who needs CSAT hours? Okay, so let me just... Julie's like, oh, maybe.
We're collecting in just
Okay.
in case, but whatever.
If you need them for
Just in
group
case.
supervision, write them down. Let's not waste the time for you. Another quick announcement, and I'd really like everybody, we want to start to push this in January really quick. The college kids that did our SABR app, they've updated some things. How many of you have talked to your clients about using the SABR app? Awesome.
That's good.
Okay, so I want to point out a new feature, and this is especially important for Eric and John to know about. So when people open their SABR app online on their phone, there is now a new feature for an SOS. So you can configure the SOS and you can put as many phone numbers in there as you can with a message. So I was testing it the other day. I just put in this message, hi, this is Floyd. I'm testing a new texting feature. Can you let me know if you got this? You could put anything in there. You could put a message, I'm really struggling right now, please call me. And then put as many phone numbers as you in. So you configure it, and then if you're struggling and you're not thinking straight, all the guy has to do, the addict, is click SOS, and it immediately texts his support people and says, please call me. So he doesn't have to think about it. It's an awesome feature. We need to start pushing that a little bit with some of our guys.
Do they have it for the partners? The SOS?
I don't know.
Do you think we could also...
I'm only logged into the addict one. So does anybody have the partner one on their phone?
I don't have my phone with me.
That's a good question.
I was trying to download it. Where do I? Is it SABR? Or is
It's
it,
on the website.
okay. I'll look for it.
There might be a QR code somewhere.
Oh, it's right here.
Yeah, there it is, up at the very top.
Yeah.
Okay.
You can
So
download it there.
you mentioned John and Eric being more familiar with it. And would we also need to introduce it then in phase 1?
Yes. We'll need to put it into phase 1. Who's teaching in February?
To be determined.
Okay.
Not
So we'll
us.
add it to the slides.
Just did it.
I've got
You
good
guys
I
were
have
great.
surgery
You
that
guys are
those 4
great.
weeks.
Yeah.
Monday nights.
Somehow Eric and Debbie will always be stuck in phase 1 as long as you're here forever. So anyway, I'll figure it out. We'll talk later.
I believe is available.
It's
That's
probably,
yeah.
it's probably back to Eric again. Then in the next April it'll be back to Debbie.
I just want to thank you guys. Last year we spread it all out, so everybody's teaching phase 1. I think clinically there's an important piece to that because you all should. It never hurts to get back to the basics and remember all the basics of where they're at. So I'm glad you're doing it. You guys did great
Yes.
We
last
had a
time,
very cohesive group,
You
which is
did.
awesome.
You did.
and that was awesome.
I know we're not giving out high fives today, but I do want to commend
Sure.
Debbie and Eric because they've taught that so well. You guys know it so well, and we really depend on you. In a way, you kind of are stuck in phase 1 forever because we really are kind of depending on you, and we put a lot on you.
I'd be
So-
happy to work one-on-one with anybody.
I know, but thank you. You.
You do
But-
like
but-
the therapy
Thank
version at phase 1. I'll take that over.
Take
The
fa-
therapy version.
Would you?
You would have to admit that teaching phase 1 after you've been teaching more intensive groups, it's a little bit more relaxing in some ways.
It is.
Get in, teach, and go home versus
I
phase
found that to be true.
And answer different kind of
phase
questions.
2 and 3 is more draining.
For me, it's not the teaching the phase 1 to leaving my group.
Yes.
I
That
know.
is too much. I cannot leave my group for a month.
I know.
I mean, I can, but you know what I mean. That's a issue.
Can I make sure I understand what you're saying? So you're saying that when you're gone for 4 weeks, your group is sort of discombobulated?
Well, because who's covering my group?
We've had different people
We've
cover
had
it.
various and sundries. It's not, you know what I mean. So that's a bit of a problem. And I was thinking a while ago, what if we broke up when we have phase 1? Like I would teach day 1 of phase 1, and Debbie or week 1, and Debbie could teach week 2. You know what I mean? So I wouldn't be missing a whole month. I'd be missing half a month or something like
Yeah.
that. And also, people would get exposure to me as well as Debbie, the partners would. So when it comes time to pick groups, they would know who's who and get a flavor and so forth as well.
What's that idea? We can play
I'm
around with those
I'm
ideas.
just pontificating over here, but
Julie?
leaving my group for a month to, no offense, intern, right? You know what I mean? Like, it can be a struggle sometimes.
Yeah, it
Yeah.
is.
Yeah.
It's hard.
My group struggled a little bit, I'm not gonna lie, just one aspect that was, I had a brand new person just come in from the previous group,
Yeah.
and she was coming in and zooming in from like Yuma.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's real tricky, cause it almost takes, 2 of us in there right now, or at least I'm pretty good, I can do group and move the computer around. Well, she didn't feel really connected, so I got an email that basically said, I just don't feel like it's working for me, I don't feel connected, and her husband had been diagnosed with autism. So she felt like a lot of his issues
More curves.
were stemmed on that.
Oh, yeah.
So
We'll have to
anyway,
work
I did
on
lose
that.
a group member. I'm not sad that it was a Zoom group member, but
Yeah, but still.
yeah.
My husband's doing really good, just for the record.
Is it?
Good.
It seemed like it, and I really liked her. I'm sad that she left because she was actually really sharp.
Yeah, he's got autism, but he's on the spectrum, but
He's like super high functioning though.
yeah,
right?
he's like a farmer, and he's like a major farmer here in Arizona,
Mhm.
Oh, wow.
and he does like multi-million-dollar farming operation he runs.
Huh.
So he's pretty sharp.
We will pay attention to all of that.
Yeah, and let's
Figure
keep
it out.
those discussions going because we'd like you all to be involved in phase 1, but not at the expense of
Phase
disrupting
2.
other groups.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's, and if I'm doing phase 1 3 times a year.
Oh, we wouldn't do
that's
that.
A quarter
We're not going
of-
to do that anymore with anybody.
Yeah, okay, yeah, but so breaking it up might be an option of me
Yeah.
teaching, half the
We'll-
whatever, so.
Well, I'll
We'll
get back in
explore
there
that.
and teach and we'll put Janet in there sometime soon here and when she gets
Hi,
rolling.
Janet.
So we should introduce Janet Hassel so in case nobody knows who she is. She's a new intern. She'll be starting here in January.
Jenna?
I don't know if you remember me.
Your husband.
Yeah, but you saw my son years ago,
Oh, I did?
Hayden, when you were an intern.
Oh, I remember Hayden.
That poor kid.
I mean, hypothetically.
I don't know if you remember
anything about him. He remembers you.
Oh, I love
But
that
you grew,
kid.
didn't you kind of grow up with the hassle?
Well, I totally grew up in
Yeah,
Castles,
yeah.
so your husband is
Yeah, Chad.
Chad. Yeah.
And Chad and I went through the whole Lifestar program years and years ago.
There you go. It was still called Lifestar.
But
Yeah, and just for the record, just to clarify, I had already checked with the board. We have done this before, and there is no ethical issue with a former client coming back to intern, and especially because it's been past 2 years. So they don't have, the board has no issue with that. But I was clarifying with Jana too that because of that shift in dynamics, it's going to feel different to her, and now she's going to see behind the curtain stuff, and so that's a different.
You're gonna be like, wow, they're not as good as I thought they were.
Oh. Just going
Well,
through
you know what
my own schooling though, it really gave me a lot of compassion and empathy for both Floyd and Kim were like my point people, but yeah, like it was.
Yeah.
That's
it was
great.
fun.
Well, welcome. We're glad
Thank
you're
you
here.
very much.
It's good to
I'm
have you.
more than thrilled to be here. I really
And how
am.
many years ago was that?
So we started in 2010.
So you're talking like 11 years ago. So
Yeah.
so a lot has changed in the program since then,
Yeah.
anyway.
Good
And I graduated in 2000 from the partner program. I think it was 12.
Yeah, we were Superstition Springs.
Yeah, we were at Super. Yeah, we were. That's right. We used
It's been
to.
a while ago.
Wow, it's been a while.
Well, good. Okay. Well, welcome.
Thank you very much.
Okay, so we got the app feature, the SOS feature. Quick reminder here, number 3. I'm not sure that we've really talked about this too much, but Kim and I, in the process of finishing our PhD, we had earned a certified clinical sexology certificate. So we both renewed, and basically what that does, at this point we've had training to deal with all kinds of sexual issues, so we're on a registry that most of you wouldn't even be familiar with for sex therapy. So we get referrals all the time, and most of them we turn away. Sometimes we're giving them to you, but things related to sex therapy, erectile dysfunction, vaginismus, stuff like that within marriage, issues related to gender dysphoria, transgender transitioning stuff, and gender identity, and sexual attractions and orientation, anything related to sexual health. And so when we get those referrals, if any of you can do them, we'll send them to you. Some of them are a little bit more high level, like challenging. So a lot of times Kim and I are just sort of referring them back to the listserv to get other help. Yeah, welcome, Kim. Glad you're here.
I'm like,
So, and along those same lines, if you have clients then that are not, maybe they're in SABR or they're struggling with other sexual issues like erectile dysfunction or vaginismus or other kinds of sexual related issues, talk to us, and we're happy to consult with you and talk about that. I just renewed mine. Is yours renewed for CCS? So, good. Okay. So with that, this is also a fairly short announcement, but with the server we're on, with the listserv we're on for sexology, I'd come across this article. It was in the Washington Post. Really good. And we've talked about transgender issues a little bit already, and we talked about sex change regret. This is let me start with this. Laura Edwards Leeper and Erica Anderson are really the first and foremost people in terms of transgender care. They started the first transgender clinic for people who want to transition. I don't even know where the clinic is, but decades ago. And they've been working with it for a long, long time. And they've been very concerned, which is part of the reason this interview happened, because there's been this massive spike in people who are identifying as transgender. And their belief is that they're receiving very poor care because the assessment is not happening. And some of these folks, the majority of them, are not inherently transgender. And and that's why there's been this spike in sex change regret going on. And they're reporting that 75% of people today who have a sex change regret issue never go back and tell their doctor that they regret having had it. And they're thinking some of that's because of the pressure, they went through all this work to do it, and now they didn't want to do it. So for whatever reason, they're not going back and talking about it. But this article, it's obvious if you read the whole thing, it's very left-leaning, but the information is really good in terms of how to make sure you're properly helping and assessing someone who's talking about those issues. A couple points I wanted to just look at. On the second page, or third page, oh, it even is in color. Is yours in color?
yeah.
These are just a couple paragraphs I just want to highlight. We don't need to spend a lot of time on this. You can read more about it if you want to. But let's just read this. Eric, will you read that highlighted paragraph? So I don't have to talk all the time.
Which Eric?
Oh, I was looking at Grinchy Eric. I look up and my eyes go right to the sweater.
Yeah.
It's working.
That's what it is.
I know.
Be loud, Brad.
But comprehensive assessment and gender exploratory therapy is the most critical part of the transition process. It helps a young person peel back the layers of their developing adolescent identity and examine the factors that contribute to their dysphoria. In this stage, patients reflect on the duration of the dysphoria. They feel the continuum of gender, the intersection with sexual orientation, what medical interventions might realistically entail, social media, internet and peer influences, how other factors, autism, trauma, eating disorder, body image concerns, self-esteem, depression, anxiety, may help drive the dysphoria. Rather than assuming that they're always a result of dysphoria, family dynamics and social peer relationships and school academic challenges. The messages that teens get from TikTok and other sources may not be very productive for understanding this constellation of issues.
Okay, it's just a good summary. Their biggest complaint is that therapists are not adequately looking at all these other issues that may be causing some of the dysphoria. And this really stood out to me probably a month ago when my niece, who was living with us, she had a friend that she said was transgender. And I was asking her about him or her, he identifies as they, talking about it. And it was obvious talking with her and then seeing him. He's not transgender. It's more of a vogue sort of hip.
Yeah.
You know, he's just kind of doing it to be cool. And he does have some other issues too. Yeah.
I was just gonna add to this because I see probably more kids in it. Well, actually, no one in here really sees kids. They got the teens, but I'm seeing a huge uptake in this with the kids I see, and often it is that it's become more talked about. I think there's a spectrum of mental health that's getting talked about more with this generation, which is great, but they don't quite understand the implications of some of those things. So I mean, I've got 3rd, 4th, 5th graders that think that they're a boy or girl because they like boy or girl things.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
sometimes, honestly, like I spend a couple sessions with them just looking at because this is also common for, if you understand developmentally, they want to be labeled. There is a level of who am I, and so they need labels, and so they're looking for labels. And so sometimes if we spend time with understanding that stereotypical gender roles aren't necessarily valid, and that, you know, it's okay if you like pink, or it's okay, you know, spending time with that. Sometimes they're like, oh, no, actually I don't think I'm a boy, I just like I'm a tomboy,
I like
you know,
baseball.
I like baseball.
Right.
So
Yeah.
just to add to that, I see a lot with my kids and my teens right now. I'm seeing a huge uptake. And the other factor is that, and this is my soapbox on social media, but most of my kids that are struggling with this either have friends or themselves that have unfiltered internet access, and they're on sites like Reddit where they just have rants that say like, hey, if people who think they're therapists that aren't, saying like, if you have these things and you're transgender, and so they're reading these things and they don't realize what they think someone on Reddit told them this, and that's what it means.
That's a big one.
Yeah. Totally.
So
Sorry.
just go. You can go with it. Just adding to the. I'm seeing a lot.
Absolutely. Thanks for saying that. I totally agree. Eric?
Oh yeah, so I was just reading a study. They said there's tons of mental health advice on TikTok, but it's not from professionals.
I
And
know.
they said so all the stuff that people are saying, none of it's evidence-based, and people are following it, which is causing bigger upticks in transgender stuff and eating disorders.
Yeah.
That was a nightmare.
My daughter sends me a new TikTok almost every single day about anxiety. And just from people. And I'm just like, I read it and I just go, this is where you're getting all of these ideas from. It drives me crazy.
Yeah.
It really is. And I think, too, back to one of the things you said, and I'm glad you're doing this, is we shouldn't confuse gender roles with dysphoria. Because just because you have a feminine guy or a masculine woman, there's still male and female. So we shouldn't just confuse because you don't like a certain gender role, that means you're transgender. And I think that's happened a lot
Right.
in the
I keep
last
trying
few
to tell
years.
my wife, I am the man of the house, even if you act like it.
I promise, even with my long
That's a
hair.
separate issue. That's
We'll talk about that later, Matt.
I might.
That's funny.
One thing that I think is some information to take with it too is that the more conservative religious areas or communities where there is more of a gender gender roles
Mm-hmm.
stereotyped is that's where I'm actually seeing more confusion. A lot of my LDS girls that don't like to wear dresses because on Sundays they're supposed to wear dresses.
Right.
And so, like, normally, like, if you go to school, there's probably maybe 1 out of 10 girls wearing a dress.
Right.
But, so I'm seeing a lot of that, too, where they're like, well, my community says that you're supposed to look like this, and I don't like that, so.
Yeah.
That must mean.
It's creating confusion, and there's too much talk going on about it, and it's creating this misunderstanding. I had this is a story I've told in presentations I've done. It was years ago, but I had a 14-year-old kid in my office, and he was sent to me, and he was so upset. It took me a while because he was crying so badly because he was gay. He thought he was gay. And once I got the story out, he had started his freshman year of high school, and he'd seen all his buddies in the hall, and so they're all coming up to him, hey, what class do you have? And they're like hugging on him, and he's hugging them, and the older boys in the hall started making fun of him, that you're hugging other boys. Do you like that? That makes you gay. If you like that, you're gay. And so he's coming in, sitting in my office and saying, I do like that. And so I sat with him and I said, you know what, dude, I think everybody likes a hug. I don't think, I have buddies that give me a hug. It's not, that's not a gay thing. And it was like this epiphany for him, like, maybe that is okay. Maybe that's normal. This is like what Abby's saying, I think. Sometimes it's, we have to be careful that they're labeling themselves. And adolescents are already in a stage of identity development anyway. So they're getting all these mixed messages. Okay, really quick. Second to last page article, there's another highlighted spot. The guy that we heard speak last spring or whenever, Walt Heyer, he's one of those guys that's sort of leading, as you recall, this sex change regret. And he was probably one that was not assessed well and had a lot of other issues and nobody really picked up on it. In a recent study of 100 detransitioners, so this is people who went through all the change and then regret and went back, 38% reported they believed their original dysphoria had been caused by something specific such as trauma, abuse, or a mental health condition. 55% said they did not receive an adequate evaluation from a doctor or mental health profession before starting transition. So again, I think it's a good reminder. The whole article is great. Those are massive numbers.
Yeah, and I think the medical profession is as much, if not more, because you now have the hormone blockers with the preteens.
Yeah, and if you read the whole article, you'll see the 2 doctors on here talk about how frustrated they are with the mental health field because clinicians are so worried about being politically correct that they're jumping and pushing affirming hormones and stuff like that because they don't want to look like they're transphobic or something, and then they end up with somebody who really wasn't, and then they have the whole. So it's an interesting climate we're in, and we just have to be careful and cautious how we're dealing with things. Yeah.
That's very good.
So, I see the most important thing takeaway for me is empirically supported careful assessment model.
Yeah.
Assessment.
Yeah.
What is that? We don't do it. We don't specialize in it. We refer out.
Yeah, basically.
You don't know.
And it's a 2-year process. So I don't know any, at least in Arizona, I don't know any doctor that would perform that until at least 18 years old and having been through 2 years worth of assessing and counseling to make sure these other issues aren't a part of it. Do you have a different understanding?
Yeah, that's what I was wondering.
What did you ask?
Jennifer Lewis does a lot of that kind of work. There's some specific clinics that would be
You can
affirmed.
look at the ASECT website,
Yeah.
and they'll give you a lot of sex therapy or sex educators. That's where I refer people that need help with things that I don't even study enough.
I got a name from Leslie, who did my RPT supervision on someone who specializes in that, so with kids specifically. Let's see if I can find it.
That would be
Yeah.
helpful.
Yeah, I'm gonna guess most
Nice
of our
to have a
clients wouldn't fall in that category, but if
Yeah.
they do, you need to give the client the care that they're asking for.
And I'd like to know what assessments they're using before to make sure they're empirically supported.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Because our reputation, if I'm sending them to some Yahoo, then I'd like to
Oh, I
know
know.
that
what
they're
they're
being
doing.
assessed in a
Well,
proper
part of the
way, so I
problem
know
is,
that.
Julie, I don't think that there's a lot of research out supporting the whole transgender transition piece. So I think some of the
It's very
evaluations and assessments are like ongoing biosocial,
Psychosocial.
yeah, to just assess that they don't have autism, they don't have these other things, and then ongoing, how are they adapting? I'm going to guess over the next few years it'll tighten up
It'll have to.
Because you're right.
We should
Yeah.
probably ask. We should probably ask.
Here's your
We should ask on
Maybe
ITAPS
apps or
or
whatever. Looks like they've got some
ICS.
Yeah.
recommendations.
I'll
I'll
bet
look that
On
up too.
would know really well.
We'll,
On may
we'll,
even
we'll
have.
reach out to some people, see if we can find us what that would
We have
Thanks.
a colleague who's she's a trans man,
translate.
and she is a real proponent for some of it. She may have an assessment we could look at. I don't know that we want to get too much into the trying to become that. It's a whole specialty. It's a
No,
whole.
no.
Usually, I mean, I can't not, like, it's so common now, like, I would be referring out every kid into almost everyone, if I refer them as soon as they brought it up.
Yeah, if you did
So
that.
usually I do like a basic 1 or 2 month where I'm kind of assessing those things. Is this more of
Yeah.
a stereotyped type
Yeah,
thing?
yeah.
Where do you
And
learn it? How to
Yeah,
do
and are we
it?
seeing improvement? And if it's that, then and we're talking with the parents all the time about it. But
Yeah, yeah. Okay. Okay, good. Men's phase 2 fantasy workbook. Let's look at this. I'm not confident that all of the female therapists in here have had a lot of exposure to workbook 7 with the men. So we want to go over that concept a little bit here. Can I have one?
Yes, and
Let's
I'll
talk
hand it
about
out.
some of
I
it.
want to hand this out probably first to the people that don't normally do this.
Yeah.
So you might not get.
You know
I got it memorized.
I'm gonna have to get shit.
I know all areas.
This isn't new, right? This is the one that has
This is not new.
You need one.
This whole workbook.
I'll take one for just so I can
Review.
reference what you're doing.
is it about fairies?
Yeah. Coming from a child therapist.
Fairies or furries?
That
Now you're
too.
getting into my fantasy.
Okay, wait, let's not go
Okay,
there.
I want to read different sections. I just want to give all of you an overview of what this workbook is about. Basically, when we have talked in here about emotional undercurrents that drive various attractions or different feelings or fantasies, that's what this whole workbook is about. And helping the men understand where it's all coming from so they can get deeper down to what's really going on to begin with. So that's what it's about. Let's go to just the very first page. Learning from your fantasies. And let's just read some of this out loud. Debbie, you want to read that first paragraph?
Sure. Starting with there are many theories.
Yes.
There are many theories about the causes and treatment of sexual addiction. But one thing that most addictionologists, those who study addictions, agree upon is that low self-worth is almost always a companion to addiction. Addicts' fantasies are usually an attempt to compensate for feelings of being flawed or not measuring up, which directly relate back to the faulty core beliefs explained in Workbook 1.
Great. Let's keep going. Julie?
In helping people break down their fantasies, we've learned 4 things. 1, that sex addicts usually have a preferred type of sexual fantasy. 2, that these fantasies represent an attempt to undo a damaged sense of self-worth. 3, that the fantasies are not likely to come true, and even if the fantasies come true, they leave the addict feeling unsatisfied, empty, and shamed. And 4, that when these fantasies are unsuccessful in rescuing the addict's self-worth, they leave the addict with an even more damaged sense of self-worth than he or she started. Then the addict will pursue his or her sexual fantasies with more energy than before, with the hope of healing that is never forthcoming. Thus, the addiction cycle continues.
Awesome. Eric, you want to read the ideal fantasy? Let's do you. Grinchy Eric's
Maybe
already
give me
talking.
a new name.
EJ.
I want to call you
What would
Eric.
you like to be?
EJ.
Eric.
EJ.
You're going to
Good
Boston,
go.
yeah?
Eric.
Yeah.
Okay. The ideal fantasy. Most people with sex addictions have an ideal fantasy that carries with it a repeating theme or dominant message. For example, Ben S., a middle-aged man, recently separated from his wife, moved out of his home and rented an apartment. He began fantasizing about a new scenario that maintained the same theme as his previous fantasies. In his fantasy, 2 middle-aged, professional or classy women who didn't know each other approached him as he was entering his apartment one evening. They flirted with him and eventually proposed to have sex with him. He accepted their offer and was able to satisfy both of them sexually. They praised him and wanted to continue their newfound relationship.
Keep going.
Ben would fantasize about the scenario when he would come and go from his apartment. and he would often linger in the recreation area hoping his dream would come true. When not actively pursuing his fantasy, he would imagine versions of the same theme while masturbating.
Okay. And then it asks the men to do an exercise and write down the 3 top fantasies they've ever had. Okay? So
Oh no, you're gonna ask him. I thought you were gonna ask the men in the room.
So story time.
Share with Julie.
Sure.
Good, Julie.
Julie's going too.
Oh my God. Let's get down and dirty in here.
Turn the recording on.
oh my gosh.
All
I
right.
gotcha. Ask the men.
Come back, Julie. Come back, Julie.
All right.
I know her fantasy.
Listening to your fantasies up there.
Somebody get Julie a fan.
Okay. All right, page 5. Once they write down their fantasies, then we try and do some contamination of the fantasy. Eric Schultz, you want to read that paragraph?
Contaminating your fantasies. To overcome your fantasies, it helps to think about them realistically. First of all, because your fantasies are so custom designed, they will rarely happen as imagined. In other words, the likelihood of your fantasies coming true is slim. Secondly, if your fantasies did come to fruition, the consequences that would result would be serious and would cause further unmanageability in your life. A definite lose-lose situation.
Okay, so then when they do this exercise, if you skip down where it says example, fantasy 1, this is where they'll start to write in, this is how it would look. The thought that my fantasy might come true is not realistic at all. For first of all, 2 classy women are not going to want to get naked together, let alone have sex with me at the same time. The odds of this happening in my apartment complex are remote. I'm sure I could pay for this kind of thing or find it on the internet, but that would eliminate the classy part of it that is in my fantasy. Yeah.
You know, I often do when they're checking that in. I often say to them, so I ask them the likeliness, or do you want me to answer that?
Yeah.
Because it's just so off the wall out there.
It's just never gonna happen. Yeah.
Think about this from what we know also with the brain stuff in phase 1, front brain, back limbic brain.
Yeah.
So when they're in a fantasy, they're obviously in a back brain limbic kind of place. When you do this exercise and you bring it back to the contamination piece, you're bringing a very frontal cortex. So if you have men that you're doing this exercise with in your office or in group, make sure that you don't end group or end your session without coming to the contamination piece to get them front brained. Don't let them walk out of your office in a limbic fantasy place and just leave. You've got, even if you go over, you have to get them back to a front brain.
I'm just gonna hang out in the lobby.
Yeah, right?
Waiting for
No.
2 classy
Get out
women.
of the
Careful, Debbie.
Get off the property.
Oh.
Worst possible consequences. Let's do
Sends
that one there.
therapist. Oh my.
Matt, you want to read worst possible consequences?
Worst possible consequences. Scabies.
Oh wow.
First of all, I would feel the guilt and shame of acting out again. Then, my standing in my church congregation would be at stake, as well as my marriage. I would either need help. I would either need to keep living a double life so that no one would find out, or I would need to tell the truth, both of which seem intolerable to me. I might get one of the ladies pregnant, or they might sue me for sexual harassment. Even worse, I might get HIV and not know it.
You'll know it.
What?
You'll know it.
You'll know it.
And what if my wife decided to take me back? I'd have sex with her. Then the HIV might go active and my wife could die. My kids would never forgive me. They'd disown me. I'd never get to know my grandkids. Later on, the HIV could go active in my own life and I'd die alone.
Wow.
Wow.
Baby drama.
Yeah, so this is important.
This is very important.
That's
You
the kind of
have-
negative what if that you want to instill.
Yes.
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 The fear.
The shame piece. This is shame induction. They need to see the long-term possibilities of how bad it could be.
I don't think it's shame induction as much as reality induction. I think
Yeah.
they have to know consequentially, and that's going to be different for every person, of course, but consequentially, because remember, you're limbic, you're not thinking consequentially, you're in the moment.
Yeah.
So that's the point.
Play the
Also,
tape forward.
It's fast forward.
Fast forward, as we do all the time in
Yeah.
substance use. Play out the tape.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly.
Use. Yeah.
Yeah.
Fast forward, and then what
Prevention
happens?
worksheets don't have the backside.
They don't.
Why,
No,
did we take that out on purpose?
What doesn't? What?
The relapse prevention worksheet.
No, the relapse prevention sheet is
I'm having
supposed
to
to.
write that in.
It's a little
Oh,
bit
good.
different.
That's fine.
You could
You
have
could,
them do it
yeah,
on there.
do it.
I was
The
just
more you
curious
do, the
if
better.
It's a little different of an
Design.
exercise. Yeah, it's more of an ABC kind of exercise, but you
Yeah.
could do
you're
that.
You're doing automatic thought, rational thought on an
Yeah.
RPS. So to me, the rational thought could include a contamination in fantasy, and you might recommend that. Like,
That's what I've always thought it was. The
Doesn't have to
rational.
But the RPS and Workbook 8 is, like the one we have on our website is way better than that.
Use the
Yeah.
one we have. Don't
Yeah.
use the one Lifestar does. Ours
Yeah.
is better.
Yeah.
It's more simple and stuff.
it could be, we could entertain changing the language on it, you know, like rational thought, contaminated fantasy, like that, you know, you could give them, like, there's two options for that.
Well, I could see
You know,
creating a fantasy contamination worksheet
I
that
think
they
I
could do
like
all the
that.
time as a separate piece, because the relapse prevention sheet really is helping them understand, okay, what was my trigger, what was the automatic thought, what core belief does that lead to,
And how do I challenge it?
and how do I challenge it? It's sort of a different piece.
You throw out there any legal consequences, any STD consequences, any
The whole
Marriage,
gamut.
religion,
Yeah.
family,
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Do you remember in Band of Brothers in the high school group when one of the boys came in and we had been doing something kind of like this in our discussion about okay, you won't be able to go on a mission. You're not going to be able to get married in the temple. He had all these
Goals.
things, and then one of the boys, he's been one of the most serious boys we've ever had in there, reported that day that he had contracted chlamydia. He had STD, and the fantasy had come real, and he described it briefly, and then the chlamydia, and he was just falling apart. Do you remember this?
That was rough.
And all the other boys and the contamination of the fantasy suddenly became very real. It was not just about not going on a mission. You could get a
sick.
disease. You could get sick. You could get somebody pregnant. And a lot of times the teenagers, and probably Tribe too, with those college boys, they're not thinking about some of that kind of stuff. They don't have that.
That's not even there.
That's like basic
Developmentally,
sex
they're not there.
education as well. That probably
Brain's not done developing.
No.
Yeah.
doesn't have
No,
that
no, no.
those conversations.
Not having that much like
Yeah.
that at church.
I think that one of the things too, and I go back to what Floyd said, is it's happened about 3 or 4 times in all my years of doing phase 2, where the guys did say, yeah, this fantasy could actually come true. And I said that, well, first of all, I said that should scare you. If it could come true, that should really, that should be a wake up
Well,
call.
one, you're not dreaming big enough.
Well, yeah, but
seriously.
but that's where this second part becomes really important, because if this is something that could happen, then the worst possible consequences could also actually really happen. We're not talking about an out there thing like in the book here. We're talking about something where if this could really happen, then you better ponder the worst possible consequences
Outcomes.
for a while.
I agree. You had referred a client to me, and I've been working with him for some time. It's probably the worst SDI I've ever seen. Top 5 in 20 years of sex addiction. He scored like a 19 on his SDI when he went into the Meadows. And he when we were doing some of this together in my office, that was his comment. I've already done some of my fantasies, and he had paid for them. So we had to go to the worst scenario, which for him involved, at one point he was destitute. Like he was spending so much money on sexual things, he didn't have enough money for food, and he was almost on the street. And then he never had a relationship with these people again. So he did these sexual things, and then never saw these people again. And so, what are the long-term ramifications? Even when your best scenario comes true, your fantasy comes true, you're left a completely empty, destitute, miserable, depressed, suicidal person. So bringing him to that awareness, that you know him too.
Same in group and individually. I feel like, hey, this is so incongruent with this, and let them sit with that.
Absolutely.
It's perfect.
Yeah. And I think Patrick Carnes would say to not be afraid of it. Let them be really uncomfortable.
Same
It's
thing
okay to
with
let
the
them sit
SAS.
and cry.
Like if they have a 13, if I hand it back to them and say the cutoff is a 6, we sit in silence and let them sit in that dissonance, because then it becomes real. Like, oh, this is more than
But
just
not,
a hobby.
at least I'm not in a 20, it's you're 13.
Like, wait a second, you gotta sit with that junk.
Yeah. Excellent. Good comments. Okay, let's skip to page 9. This is the last thing I want to do with all of you here today. This is where it's really important. And I love this kind of stuff. This goes back to my dissertation and everything I had done with sexualized emotion stuff. So the meaning inside the fantasies. Anybody willing to read that paragraph?
I'll read it for you.
Thanks, Jen.
Excuse me. Every fantasy has a story inside itself that relates to the attempt to recover from the faulty core belief mentioned earlier. Your task in the next exercise will be to find the story hidden inside your fantasies. For example, here is what Ben said about the story inside of his fantasy as it relates to his wounded core beliefs. My fantasy is directly related to my self-esteem. First of all, the two women are well-respected women and they approach me. So if two well-respected women approach me, then I must be acceptable. The fact that they want to have sex with me means that they want to be close to me and be vulnerable. Again, a sign that I am qualified to carry on within a trusted relationship. Next is that I'm able to satisfy both of them sexually. This means that I am a capable lover and that I am adequate sexually, which must be a good sign of my worth. Lastly, they both want to come back and do it again, which confirms that I am lovable, valued, appreciated, capable, and accepted. The fact that there are two well-respected women means that it's not a fluke. It makes it more valid.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah. So remember, if you start with the fantasy, you're in complete limbic area. Then you move to the like cognitive dissonance. You move to the worst outcomes. You're moving them back to front brain, and then when you they're finally able to do the meaning of the fantasy because now they're logical. So the whole process in this workbook is from back to front. And I usually tell the guys in here, you have to do these first 3 exercises all in one sitting, because I don't want them to do their fantasies over the course of 3 days, and then they're sitting in fantasy life the whole time. You got to do the whole thing, and sometimes do it in my office. Like I've had like this one guy, I wanted him to do it sitting in the lobby, and then when you're done, you'll have an hour, and then we'll do our session, because I want to make sure I've pulled them into a front brain kind of place. Yeah.
I tell them in my group that if it's starting to get triggering for you and you're like, you're going that direction, then walk away from it. And the other thing I wanted to add to that is I've had a handful of guys, I don't fantasize. And I'm like, what? You don't and I,
Party watch. Yep. That's
yes, exactly.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. And that's where I go with it.
That's awesome. Say just a bit more about that.
Yeah, so I had a client, he's like, yeah, I don't have any fantasies. And I asked him, I was like, really? What kind of porn do you watch? And so he had the theme, he told me about the theme, and so we dug into it. But yeah, the porn is a lot of fantasy.
It is fantasy.
It's going to be revealing, it's going to be revealing either the emotion, the sexualized emotion, or the sexualized attachment need, or
absolutely.
Stuff.
Yeah, which scares me in the Band of Brothers. When we have kids in there that are cross-dressing and they have furries, fantasies, and it's out there. And we had one kid a few years ago where it was all like attracted to everything. I'd probably call him pansexual nowadays. And when you looked at his emotional stuff, he was kind of a weird kid. He was kind of off, and you could see that his emotions were everywhere. Like he's so confused as a kid in life, just in life. And his sexual fantasies and porn reflected that. He doesn't know where he is.
Literature supports most guys are watching seduction porn, right, which leads right into the faulty core beliefs. So you have an easy end. Same thing Eric said, right? Oh, you want people to seduce you and come on to you and think you're lovable and likable, and you're off to the races at that point.
Well, and then amateur porn has been way more popular for that same reason, because it's guys prefer the real thing.
Yeah, more real.
Because they feel like it's real.
Isn't that weird?
They feel like it's real.
Yeah. Like one porn is more real than another porn.
Well, I would also say there's a lot of, even sexually themed stuff online that's not officially porn, but that's doing the same thing for some of these guys, because they won't feel as bad about watching it because it's not officially porn, but it's on YouTube. So it's on YouTube, it must be okay. So, yeah.
Netflix? Oh my gosh, things are getting so racy. It's like really
everywhere.
Oh my heck.
Popular pop singer just came out and said, her name's
Billie Eilish.
Billie Eilish.
And she said, I think it was either 11 or 13, she started watching porn, and I think it's good for that generation because she just turned 18.
Yeah.
And she's talking about how it's harmful for her and how
it ruined her life.
Wow.
Her self-esteem,
Her
and
brain.
seeing the and she's actually well known in the media with the teens, where for a long time she wore really baggy clothes and hid her body, like she was very like didn't want to be objectified.
Interesting.
And she talked about how like she would compare herself to these women that weren't real.
I saw that in the news. One of the first case studies they put in this article is a young lady who didn't think she was transgender until after she was exposed to violent porn. Yeah, and that was part of her confusion with it all. We have tons of kids that have come through the teen program who will report to us that they didn't have some of the curiosity about certain kinds of things until they saw certain things, and suddenly their mind opens up to this new. And if you think about it, if a kid is
addict that the ITAP talks about.
The what?
The contemporary addict.
Yeah.
Where they don't come in with a lot of emotional stuff. They just it's the porn.
It's the exposure. So
Right. The novelty. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. But.
Absolutely. No, you're right. And I think to myself, and some of this is my own research with my dissertation, if you have a kid who's already on the edge of some self-esteem problem, or he was abused or something, and suddenly he's looking at porn and he happens to find porn that mimics the abuse that happened to him or her, or something that sort of reflects a deficit of something she's already struggling with, they go right there, and they might not have except that they were exposed to it. So, okay, last closing piece on page 11. This is how they sort of end all these exercises up for the men. And I think this is fantastic. I love how this workbook is set up. Think back in a time to when your fantasies started. When was it? Where were you? What events were happening in your life when your fantasies began? For example, in answer to this question, Ben said, I remember I first started fantasizing about girls when I was in high school. I was kind of a nerd, and I wanted to be friends with the popular boys at school. One thing I noticed was that they all hung out with the cute cheerleader type of girls, so I figured if I had one of the cute girls as a girlfriend, then I would have an in with the popular guys and be accepted into their group. My fantasies haven't stopped since then. It's just a perfect example. Okay. All right. So let's be good with that.
I like coming back to this in phase 3, actually.
Yeah.
Sexualized
Yeah.
attachments.
We probably need to come up with the worksheet you're talking about.
Because they just have more, more
That
sobriety.
is a concept that is very unique.
Glance today.
Sexualized attachments is a concept that's very unique to Floyd. I mean, he's put it out in the world, and I think you're going to
One
see
day a
it
year,
go
John, that's it.
wide and broad
What?
as far as
I'm hoping to actually submit an article to the journal with Sash.
You're like, yeah, we're
That's cool. I didn't know that was unique. Actually.
He came up with this.
Well,
Yeah, this is the
well,
new deal.
ITAP came up with sexualized attachments,
But in the way that you do it.
and I just like gravitated on that because I'm like, oh yes, and so
He did all his
I think it
research.
really adds to it.
Thank you.
Eric already found the resources for us there.
Go Eric.
Okay, all right. Group time frames. We can be super short on this because Kim's piece on the healing group is more important. I just want to be really clear, and this is probably more for Eric and Eric. The standard of care we're expecting in phase 2s, and I'm not sure how this is going to play out in the women, is that the check-ins are short, right? Just 10 minutes or less. So if somebody wants to keep talking, you're saying, I appreciate that. Let's pause on that. We can come back to it. Short check-ins, and then you're going to get right into a teaching piece. Every single group should have a teaching piece in phase 2. It has to. Hopefully, it always comes back to some of the concepts in those books. We created all those Google slides, and Eric approached me yesterday or 2 days ago that there's some better videos, some updated videos and some things. So he's going to be editing some of those Google slides that you guys have for phase 2.
Some of them are missing too. Can't even get into them.
Yeah, we probably need to update all of them.
They're all on the drives, but yeah.
You all have the Google access to the slides, in the women do too.
You
So.
go to SABR and then you go to phase 2
Yeah.
and there's the slides, but we can.
And the reason we put all of those on the Google Drive, just as a reminder, everything is so organic. I just don't believe it's possible to have a good program without constantly changing and updating, and there's too much research and too much stuff coming out all the time. So Eric's going to be updating some stuff. John, if you see stuff in there too,
Okay.
let's update it. Make sure your groups always have a teaching piece, something, and then go to the workbook processing. Let guys process from their workbooks and share, and then personal processing towards the end. Checkout should always be short. keep it short, and that's the general format. That's what the guys are expecting, and that's what the women are being told their husbands are getting. So
Yeah.
let us know if you have questions about that. That's really all I wanted to say about that.
I just, as a piggyback to that, men phase 2, I think the continuing, one of the things that has been such a big complaint for the partners is empathy. Their lack of empathy, you know, and focusing on empathy and what that means, you know, not always agreeing with her necessarily, or, you know, but how do you, you know, just constantly reiterating the need for empathy
Yeah.
with the men, with their partners.
That comes up almost weekly in phase 2. Like,
Yeah.
I don't get it, that comes
And I
up
know
a
they
lot.
don't, so I know it's a learning piece, but
Right.
just the continuous phase 2 and phase 3.
Maybe role play
And
conversations they have with their
also
wife.
just helping the men understand when they're really in their betrayal trauma, right? Because I think that's a really important piece that will help them get to that place of empathy.
She's limbic.
She is so limbic, and it's not that maybe it's because she's in her trauma, and for them, it then brings up their shame, right, and their defensiveness, and now we've got this really bad dynamic going on. And so I liked what Stephanie Carnes talked about when she came, you know, and that is maybe educating the men a little bit more in phase 2 about the betrayal trauma piece, so that they can, you know, understand, and then we can kind of de-escalate some of this constant, you know, I feel like disconnection and, you know, that's going on in the couples. I don't know.
It is a little bit the age-old thing when the guys are starting to get better, they're talking more, they're feeling less shame, but yet they're not that point where they can have empathy for others. So it's kind of like there is that process of understanding their own shame before they can.
Well,
So
we're talking
it's
prefrontal stuff.
yeah.
again.
So it just keeps
Yeah.
going. So it's going to be the constant theme that we're going to have to keep coming
Well,
back
and remember
to.
too, they're only in phase 2, so they still have those areas of the brain that are shut down, and they're having to rewire back
Yes.
to those slides from phase 1. It's going to take them probably half of phase 2 to get rewired a little bit.
Well, and if they're constantly in a state of sober, unsober, they're going to keep activating the betrayal trauma every single time. Not that that's a part of the process, but, you know, because there's often, oh, I'm getting better now. We're act out for 3 months, and she's going to be like, I don't give a flying fart, you know, like, I'm whatever. So just helping them understand, oh yeah, this pulls the rug, you know, out from under
Yeah,
her
it was
feet.
like, she was like a fart. Sorry.
I don't have a problem saying it. I was like, well, what word is that?
Yeah.
Cuss
Okay.
off, you kids.
Good.
I got
All right,
this,
Kim,
yeah.
why don't we give you some time to talk about the healing group and the changes that have occurred there. The only thing that I've promoted and I've talked to everybody about publicly is really, well, you saw the video, and the extra video with John.
Oh
So
my
you come
gosh,
on-
that was
With
so
John's
hilarious. Can I say that just made my day?
Why?
I just walked around
yeah,
smiling.
Thank you. Thank
Oh
you.
my gosh.
Yeah, I was
Love you
warned
with
that
the
Floyd was
fro.
going to do something
I
before
like
he
that.
did
So you
it.
need to check in your video. You check the video. I'm like, why? Just go check it. I was like, okay.
Well, he kept complaining about his hair.
I know. He's like,
I was like, okay, we can fix that.
You fix that, Floyd.
So he did for those who didn't see it, John had a big afro.
Yes.
Amazing.
Yes.
It looked pretty good.
Brett really liked it.
Yeah.
I bet he did.
was a lot
I bet
younger.
he did. Hey Kim, you come up here
No,
since
I'm
you're doing.
good. I'm good.
Well, we got this recording.
Oh, we got a recording?
Yeah, and I'll sit over here.
We'll probably spend more time on that. So let me skip while she's sitting down here. Men for the
We're
trauma
recording
egg
this?
stuff, we are, because Shiloh and Angie need to see it. Let's just skip really quick to the trauma egg.
Right.
Remember, this is just an announcement. Remember that the trauma egg should be being processed in your office with you. So I have one client right now I'm working with. He goes to Brittany's group, and we've processed his whole egg in session. We spent 6 months working on it. He's had times he's cried about certain things. We've had awareness about certain things. We're writing on his trauma egg. And now he's identified probably 3, maybe 4 vignettes he's just going to bring to the group to process in group. Your group should not be filled in phase 3 with months and months and months of trauma egg work. You should be done with somebody's trauma egg in 2, 3, 4 sessions. Done. So make sure that you're doing the trauma egg individually with you.
Yeah, or their therapist, whoever their therapist is. Awesome.
So Women's Healing Group.
All right, first, I mean, we announced it a few weeks ago, so I'd like to know if you guys have any questions. I'd like to know, Debbie just started a group with the last phase 1. Maybe it's been going 2 weeks?
2 weeks.
Okay, I wondered. I was like, 2 or 3 weeks?
Right.
Like, how's it been received? How's the new SABR workbook working?
Well, they know no different.
Because they don't, right, they haven't been in anything else.
So,
Yeah.
so far good, and I like the fact that the very beginning of this is all about regulation and working with emotion. And so the first night we ended up kind of talking about anger. It was just organically kind of came up. And then week 2, we got into the very beginning of the workbook on window of tolerance and emotional regulation. And I know that there's a couple of women in the group that have had some rage issues. And so hitting that right off the very first, I think is really wise, because it's kind of been a component, it's kind of been
We
down the
integrate
list, right? And if we get a chance to get to it, then we get to it. So I feel like they're getting a lot of really good information and applicable things, because then we're getting down to talking about how does that translate into your real life and what does that look like. And so also I've combined it in this, last week with, hey, we've got holidays coming up. This is going to really challenge, your betrayal trauma. And so you've got to go in prepared and have a plan and understanding. So we're going to do a whole lot of hands-on stuff this next week with them. So I see that with the workbook and with this, the LifeStar, I'm kind of bouncing back and forth a little bit at first.
You probably would have to.
You have to, because there's so many exercises at the very beginning of the new healing workbook. It's hands-on. It's everything from 5 senses to, breathing exercises to, which, my goal as a therapist here at first is to help them when they're having a trauma response to stay grounded, so that they're not creating, more damage to the relationship, which then creates more trauma, which then more disconnection, and then we just, we've got something like the Turners, right? So.
Yeah, and I also think it will help us, just as a side note, identify comorbidities faster, like personality disorders. If you have somebody, borderlines and things like that, then we can kind of think, okay, what else can we do with this individual, and not keep them all the way to phase whatever, and then figure out, oh crap, she really hasn't digested any of this because she's got this other issue going on, and then we can get them the right help, because group for a borderline will not be or at least a group like this will be very difficult for a borderline to manage. And usually they're not borderline. I'd say that a very, very small number. It usually is complex trauma, but we do get those, and then they just disrupt the group, and they disrupt everything.
So some other common ones would be eating disorder.
Yes.
They might have an eating disorder or a previous eating disorder, and it flares up again, or it was unresolved.
Sure.
The other one that's common is childhood abuse, and now suddenly those wounds and the feeling betrayed opens up all those old wounds, and so that starts to come up again, as well as some of the stuff we talked about in phase 1. Suddenly they're shopping like crazy, they're spending like crazy, they're eating like crazy, some things like that where they might have had a history of problems with that.
Which emphasize, it's not direct here, but emphasize the need for individual therapy.
Right.
Oh my gosh,
Because
yes.
if we're talking about there's another issue here, like an eating or whatever it is, and we're looking at this particular trauma in this group, this really compounds the need for individual therapy.
Well, and we kind of have that written into, when you take, like you ask every week, have you seen your therapist, this week? And it's like, yes, no, yes, whatever it is. But I think as the group therapist, it's going to be even more important that you pay attention and just look for, like if you have somebody who's severely dysregulated or not sober, not getting the sobriety they need if you're in the men's group, and they haven't seen their therapist for more than a month, that's probably going to be a problem. And they're going to be your group sabotagers. They're going to be the ones who take over, and the ones who come with their grievances, the same ones week after week after week, and they're not getting any resolution.
Drags on and on and on.
And back to what John said about individual therapy, when I presented it to my current phase 2 group, I basically said that here's the shift in the focus, right? We're focusing on betrayal trauma. healing you from that. If you've got other trauma, you know, then that's where your individual therapist is. That's where you go for that.
Good point.
And work on that. We're trying to keep it
Help them
just
contain,
to this.
contain it.
Right.
Yeah.
And they really, so far the feedback has been very positive on that.
Good.
That's awesome.
That's good.
So just as a quick reminder, the whole concept about partners is not doing their lifelong trauma work in SABR anymore. They came here to get help for the finding out about their spouse's addiction. We're going to deal with all trauma related to that only. If they have to, not everybody has childhood wounding. That's relevant. Not everybody has a history. So we're reeling that in. So there'll be one group, healing group for women after they do phase 1, and that's it. They'll graduate from that group. So their trauma egg should be focused on disclosure on. You know, it'll be important that the men, I think, know too. You know, this is going to be a change. You guys aren't doing the same thing for a reason. You know, the etiology of addiction is just very different, you know, than what she's dealing with. They're equally important, they're just different. So the etiology is almost always starts in childhood for an addict, you know, with shame and self-worth and attachment issues. Now she may have the same thing, but she didn't come here for that. That was not her. She didn't sign up for daddy's alcohol and let's spend 4 months in group on that. Even though it's relevant, and if it's relevant and she can't move past it, she should go to her individual therapist.
Yeah, I want to say, I think a lot of the women, it is going to come up.
Of course.
Because it has for us historically. So it'll be really important when you do the women's group to be able to be confident enough to say that's really important. You need to go back to your therapist and work on some of that.
Also, there might be, if they've come from other programs where they've had the codependent model, you might have to think about, I'd say use the term re-education, but re-education of helping them to see things from a betrayal trauma model, because they're not the same. And so you still got a lot of people out there. There's still a lot of stuff out there about codependence if you go to the bookstore or the online or wherever,
That'll be that way
or
for
to the
15
Meadows. So there's still that kind of mindset. So there is going to be some retraining.
And there's lots of ways to teach the codependency model without saying codependency. That's another thing to be aware of. When you're talking about family of origin, when you're talking about your brokenness finds another brokenness, when you talk about you found something familiar, those are all the codependency model. They're all the you're sick, you came sick into the relationship. And that is what we are not teaching. It's so important. We're the first to not teach it, you know, and it's going to take a while because even people who've gone online and looked, you know, for support groups, they're mostly codependent based. You know, they'll say, well, what's your problems? What did you bring into it? Of course you married a guy who blah, 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 whatever. Which is all codependent models. So you're going to have to really listen when you're working with a partner or even an addict to that language and help reframe it. You know, help reframe it for them. You know, right, but she's here because you betrayed her.
But that brings up, so the betrayal actually brings up all the past from them, but that's the way to say it. You know, this is coming up for you because of the betrayal, but that's a separate thing.
Yeah.
Right.
Yes, it's getting, we call it being like wounding, getting bumped, right?
Yeah.
So, you know, if I grew up with an alcoholic dad, for instance, it's going to trigger me all over the place when I have a husband who isn't present and who, you know, tries to control me. Of course, that wound is going to get bumped, but that is not what we're going to be processing with the partners.
That's why I love it, because you come at it from that attachment model perspective.
100%.
And so it's just, you know, I call it's like having salt rubbed into a wound that was already there, only this time it is just so overwhelming.
Flamed.
And yes, and the Prodependence model is an attachment-based, crisis-focused model. So we're just talking about you losing your connection and what that does when someone pulls away, and it's going to spin you. There's a lot. There's going to be a lot of learning. That our slides need to be updated as well to match the workbook, which I haven't even touched yet, but I think we can all get together and do that. It's a lot of it's still relevant, and it's just reordering it, taking out things and adding things. And I think, like with the men and women, we want to be organic with that. If you find a good video that will go with the concept we're teaching, or
you know, you come up with a worksheet idea, any of that, I just think adds to, you know, all of us have our knowledge and our experience that, you know, we've gained from working or living. And I for one, and I know programmably that's what we tell them, we're open to this. This is what we're always doing. We're not stuck in this because we don't want to do any work. You know, we put a lot of work and effort into this. Rob and I's book comes out in April. We just got the release date from Rutledge, and another piece that's going to be in there that I actually brought up. Rob kind of bristled for a second, but I said, I also want to address when the partner abuses the addict. There is there is a time where the partner can be abusive, and it's just as destructive.
Yes.
And we understand why, but there's a whole section on when the addict is the abused. So
I would add to that, some of the couples in the program don't make it because the wife becomes so toxic and so abusive.
but usually her needs aren't getting met. Usually she's been told she's codependent,
for sure,
and so
for sure.
the reason she does that usually is that reason.
Yeah.
And you know, that would probably be a good piece to add to our slides, especially as we're working through, after we get them really, you know, grounded with the regulation stuff, to kind of understand that, because I know we're dealing with a couple that there's some of that going on. I've had several.
It's insane. I mean, the guy's got 2 years of sobriety.
Yeah.
The wife is highly dysregulated.
Well, and I feel like she's got all the help she needs. As we were talking, she does sound like a case for borderline for me, just listening. As we were talking, I was talking to, he's trying to give me the feedback. I know, Debbie, you're her therapist, so clearly you've done her stabilization.
I can't get her to join group. I can't get her to, right? And she's out there trying to find all the reasons why our program doesn't work. And so I've got to actually challenge her the next time I see her, which is not
That'll
next
be
week,
fun.
but the week
But
after.
that sounds,
No,
see,
it's
remember,
not. I don't know what
remember
to do.
borderline always wants, and I always say, when I have a borderline person, they need to have a grievance. If things get better, they have no role to play, even though they're hurt.
Nor do they have a method of connecting.
No.
The hurt and the pain and
Is their connection.
that is the way they connect.
The problem with her though is this isn't her first round with betrayal trauma. So now I've got, it is so complex, her trauma, you know, and then in the midst of all this, Dad dies from COVID, and I mean, you're right, she acts like borderline.
It's hard to know.
And it's so hard
Even
to
if she's
know.
not borderline, the DBT kind of approach,
Yes,
all
that'll
of
be
this
really good.
will help her no matter what.
My concern is that, well, I don't do DBT, I've got to refer her out.
Right.
That's going to feel like abandonment to her.
Well, just hold on to her.
I just want to say, you say that's not your expertise, but DBT is such a simple
It is.
modality. I don't see there's any reason why you couldn't buy a DBT workbook.
Oh, I have it. Okay.
And
I just
just
start doing some
do it.
things with
Yeah,
her.
I'd like to do this with you for the next 9 months.
Keep
And
her out of the
Become
emotion.
an DBT specialist.
The next 9 months.
Are you on board?
So keep her out of the heavy emotion and keep her into just reestablishing. So,
Yeah.
okay,
So you take men borderline as well.
Oh, I hate borderlines.
Okay, so
They
now
make
Debbie
my
is now the
inside
borderline.
Said every borderline
They
today.
make my inside shake so bad. That's how I know they're borderline.
Oh, when John came to me and said I want to put my head through the wall, I'm like, oh, it's probably a borderline.
I know.
And I had a session with him. It wasn't even her.
Just
It was
listening to it second.
Just listening
Yeah,
to
he
it.
had to come in and sit
Secondhand.
down in my office to regulate.
Debbie like, are you okay?
No, I'm not.
No, I'm not.
Yeah.
Going crazy.
Yeah, I know. I get off a session with her and go,
That's an
oh
extreme
my gosh.
case.
Yeah, we're gonna get those. We just want to recognize them. I've always wanted to put
I'm
a
waiting for her to
DBT
get mad at
arm
me and
into this.
leave.
I know, me too.
That's what they usually do. They usually get mad at you and leave.
Usually,
So.
they just don't
Yeah.
leave happy, and it can be kind of gnarly.
But I don't
Okay.
want her leaving and bad mouthing the program, so I'm doing my best.
Or going
Well,
to the board.
She's looking everywhere else too.
Luckily, there's just those are
They don't
few
ever
and
go to the
far, but they
board.
do happen.
Yeah.
What's that?
They don't ever go to the board.
No, never. Okay, so the primary thing is we're shortening the program. Is because we're combining 2 and 3 and calling it the Healing Group for Women. It's going to be longer than phase 2, but not as long as phase 3. So you're gonna hit that middle.
So
You know.
realistically, what are we on average looking at then?
I think what did we put in?
I
the
think you
task
put
list?
8 to 14 months or something.
Something like that.
I think I put something like
18 months is about
18
reasonable.
months max.
Probably a year
Yeah.
to a year and a half.
Families, yeah. they're
Yeah.
shooting
I
for
think I
it.
put 12 to 18 for women.
I was
Yeah.
wrong also on that.
I
No.
think that's realistic.
Now, can I add to this, because I had a conversation with, I can't remember who it was, the other day too. We need to be better in the phase 2 men about thinking about time frames. If they've gone through all those slides twice, they're ready to go.
They gotta go.
They shouldn't be in phase 2 longer than 8 months. If they are, you got to kick some butt. Get them going. Either get with it or get out.
And there's a little, can I interrupt one thing here because it's important. Sometimes we can put deadlines, even in phase 3. We can put that
We are putting down.
by the end of March. We're done. Whether you're done or not, this ends at the end.
Get
of
with it.
March. Get
So
with
some
the
of them start to drag it out, and they need to just get it done, get it moving. So
Well, and we kind of put some deadlines. We want deadlines for these groups. We need to have that. We need to have a treatment plan for groups like we do for individual therapy. We don't just go on and on without a treatment plan. That's not ethical. We have to have a beginning and an end, and when they accomplish their goals, they're out. They're out. It is not a processing group. It's not a life, come and just try and stay sober, make your wife happy because you're still there.
like a support group. It's not a support
It's
group.
not a support group. So that's a huge change we want to really emphasize with all of our therapists running groups is you should not be in here. You need to be looking at your task list and getting that done. You should not be in here longer than 18 months. That's our max.
Is maintaining sobriety part of their tasks?
Should
Because
be.
what if they're not maintaining sobriety but they've gone through their workbooks?
Well, I just asked my client in phase 3, who's slipping a lot. I asked him to go back to phase 2, so he's not allowed to be in phase 3 anymore.
So we don't graduate them.
No.
We just keep them in phase 2 even though they've been there for 2 years?
No,
I
we
mean,
need
let
to
them
figure it
then?
out what's going on.
They need to
He
right?
probably needs to do some individual work for a while until he's ready to do the work. Yeah. and
I
then-
think that's going to be an ongoing. That is one of the biggest complaints sometimes of the partner. Well, he's just sitting there. I don't even know what he's
Still acting
doing.
out,
He's
right.
still
Is he
acting
making any
out.
progress? Your task list should be your treatment guide. All the tasks we have, that should be
But
the treatment.
sobriety's on there, not improved sobriety, not perfect sobriety usually, because their sobriety, it changes over time.
There's a little bit off topic, but not really. It's like a lot of kind of, you stay on your side of the street, he stays on his side of the street, and it's this black box. And I think partners need to know exactly what expectations they can have for the program. They're spending the money, they don't know what's going
Yeah.
on
That's a
on
good
that
point.
side.
That's a
So
good
I
point.
think that they would need to be educated, both of them, I guess. This is what the tracks look like, this is what we're gonna be covering. these
They
are
can see the
expectations.
task list on the website for men and women.
They can.
So they have access to what their guy should be and what the, you know what I mean?
Yeah,
Maybe
but
we
they're
could
not
do a better
getting-
job of giving them both.
And
Yeah.
we can meet the individual need, but I think the standard of having, we don't want having a standard for how long they're in a group. Yeah, there's gonna be individual needs and going back from 3 to 2, but I think we do need a standard. Frankly, if we get through phase 2 and 3 within 18 months to 2 years would be a good general standard.
I think that's on the new, I think we put that phase 2 men should be 6 to 12 months, and phase 3 shouldn't go past 12 months. So
Yeah.
that tells you how much individual work they're going to have to do in conjunction with their group.
They should be doing more individual work than group.
Okay, so
a
I
lot
have
of their stuff should be happening in individual work.
I have a male client, addict, who I've worked with since he came, and his wife works with Dr. Red, Jerry Red. But so he has seen me every week since he's been in the program. I realize not everybody can do that financially, but he just graduated, Ed. And he's been sober throughout the whole program. He's not always the perfect husband or shows up the right way, but he's done, and because I've kept him on task, because he's come to me, I can say, I want you to plan your ordeal right now before you get to phase 3. So he was working on his ordeal as he went into phase 3. He did his trauma A with me and in group, and I would tell him what to do in group, and he just graduated under a year from phase 3.
Yeah, I don't know when he started phase 3, because he started
January.
Matt's group, but
Yeah, I think it was January, so he just graduated.
That's awesome.
Yeah, and it's not like a woo. I'm just saying he did it, I think, primarily because he had that ongoing individual accountability and support.
that is totally probably why a lot of my guys stall, because if they don't get on the calendar,
So
then they get pushed back, and so then there is the stalling.
They
So
don't
I
process
wonder-
that's good. I think there's gotta get them in.
Yeah, I wonder if there's times, Eric, where you want to give them an ultimatum. If you're not seeing your individual therapy, you can't come to group anymore.
Yeah.
And if you can't get on the schedule, then get on for February, whenever you can get on, because you're not allowed to be in group if you're not doing individual work. And when the guy gets up for his trauma egg and he just starts, I would say, have you already talked to your therapist about this? Okay, and you could even pause it. I don't think you're ready to do trauma egg. You should have been doing this with your therapist. You can bring back to us the few you want to talk about. So you can set the standard for some of that. And we probably need to just up the ante on some of this. Pull them in a little bit.
So it says in phase 2 when they sign their consent form and all that, they have to go to therapy at least once a month.
Once a
Right.
month.
And
As
a
a
lot of
minimum.
them, that's kind of what they do. Is it
Once a month
worthwhile
is
to
okay.
say that we need to encourage twice? Should it say you
It
need to
depends
go
on the guy.
twice in there?
Depends on the guy.
Especially what they're doing in group. Like if they're, if you have one guy and he's coming every month, but you can see he's really dragging, I'd confront him. I'd say, man, you're really working slow on this. How often are you seeing your therapist? You probably need to go in more than once a month. You need to get through this a little quicker here. You need to get this done.
And I think we have to be more
Challenging, I would
direct when we say, can you hold back a minute? I'd like to talk to you. And say, you took up a lot of time in group today. Seems like it's the same thing I've been hearing for the last few weeks, whatever your conflict is with your wife. You haven't been going to individual therapy. You need to do that. Because you can't just bring it here. You won't get what you need always here. You've got to have that individual work. But I think as therapists, we can't be afraid to challenge them that way. That's part of what they expect from
They
us.
want to be challenged.
Whether they want it or not.
Yeah.
At the moment.
When do the group therapists email the individual therapist when that happens, when those conversations happen, to say?
That's a good point. I try to, but I don't know that everybody's remembering that. Like you got to email each other when stuff comes up,
So
especially if you have a convoluted case like we've got. Who's the one we're working on together with?
The veils.
Yeah, so like you've got the mom, the wife. I've got the husband. Brittany's got the husband in group, and then she's going to Matt. So like when there's a lot of us, we gotta all be on the same page.
I have her in group.
That's what I meant.
Okay. You're not coming to see me.
Well,
No, she sees you.
I think that coordination, it's easy to fall down on it. It just is. I've had a few I've had to coordinate, but I try really hard. Like, I notice this is what he's doing in individual or she. Can you focus on this? Or did he accomplish that in group? Was he able to do that?
Yeah.
Or if the group guy or gal were to say to me, hey, this client of yours is really dysregulated. She hasn't seen you in a while. I encouraged her to come to you. That would be just like $1 million to me because I don't have a clue.
I know.
Yeah.
I know. Remember that theoretically, group will speed the process up of healing and recovery if you're doing well at playing ping pong with their issues. So if I'm seeing the guy and I say to him, okay, this is what we worked on. I want you to take this back to group, and then he takes it back to group. He works on stuff, and the group therapist says, oh, take that back to your therapist, and you're going back and forth. It'll go so much faster. We do this constantly. We have to coordinate in Band of Brothers for the teenagers, where we're working on something individually, and then before group I'll say, Eric, we got to confront the kid on this. I just saw him this week. And then Eric will lead a process for the kid in the group about what we did, and then challenge him at the end of that to go back to your therapist and talk about it, and it'll go faster. Everything speeds up if we're doing it right.
I also think it's useful to set limits in group. So how long do you think you're going to need for this particular process? Would 10 minutes do it?
Especially if you have 5 people wanting to process.
Because sometimes people they take advantage because they're not seeing their therapist or they're in crisis and they go on, and it's hard to know where to cut them, So I'd say, hey, would 10 minutes work? Because I'm going to cut you there. So you're going to have to think about how you're going to get it out in 10 minutes.
Probably the biggest pitfall I would see for some of the clients is that 1, they're trying to get their needs for individual counseling met in group.
Yeah.
Or 2, they're trying to get their needs met for individual social connection or bonding in group, get those needs met. And so you're going to have to challenge that sometime. You need to go back to your therapist, do individual work, or it sounds like you need to find some time to hang out with the ladies after group, or and help them to see that those needs are a little separate from what we're doing clinically in the group.
I noticed too, just over the years in doing phase 2 for both men and women, that if they're always talking about their spouse, they're probably not doing any work in individual therapy. If they're
That is
if
so
they're
true.
always, if that's always the thing.
Yep.
Yeah, we probably need to go back to therapy and do your own work a little bit.
I have to say, I do think sometimes these issues are coming up in group because you're all doing such a great job running group. And I think sometimes clients get spoiled because you accomplish so much in group. When the cohesion is high, they are getting some social needs met.
Right.
You know, when you're doing good clinical work, they are getting some individual needs met. And then they sort of expect that group can do everything, and it can't. So, little shout out, kudos to you that
for sure.
it's going well. And that's why the problem is happening.
But I think it's just, for us, this is a good time. I think we've made a lot of changes to the program to kind of evaluate yourself. Like, what can I do this next year specifically? Like, for me, it was really hard for me to shut people off when they're emoting. That's just hard. I don't like doing it. It makes me feel bad. So when they're emoting and they're in distress, so for me, I learned how to say, so you seem really upset today. Can we do it in about 5 minutes? Or do you need more time? Maybe somebody can meet you after group, or maybe you can make an appointment with your therapist. What are you going to do today to get support for that issue since we didn't get to it? So I try to not ever leave. You know, that helps me. Then it does, I don't feel so bad when, you know, I have to say, you know what, we got to keep moving. There's 12 people in group and there's a lot of needs, and it's just, it's hard to do. So I think in your own mind, kind of think about, what can I button up? What can I do better? Do I need to educate, teach more concepts? Or do I need to get this couple guys, do I need to reel them in, or gals? Whatever do I need? So the idea with the change, not to belabor, I know you guys have seen it all, but the primary change is our language. It's how we made the big change a couple of years ago with Prodependence, but now it's just tightening the bolts on how we approach what we say, how we say it, recognizing what we're doing. What is our treatment plan for this person? And our treatment plan is, and Rob says this really beautifully, and I love it, because he said, as therapists, we automatically want to think that everybody wants to walk out of therapy being more self-actualized and a better person than they were when they came. That's us. That's not about them. Some people just want to get back to driving carpool, making dinner. They don't care to be a better person. They just want to be able to function. But sometimes we hold them longer than we should because they feel like they got to reach this echelon of, self-actualization, and they just want to function. They maybe want to function at the degree they were functioning before this hit them in the head. So we have to keep our own needs and what we think they should be out of the equation. Even though you could say, gosh, 6 more months and she'd really be a much nicer person, or whatever. Just give them what they've signed up for, and make sure that they're following their treatment plan, they're able to accomplish those tasks, and then let them go. Doesn't mean their therapy's over. It means they've accomplished what they need to accomplish in SABR. So I'm excited for the change. The group that doesn't know any difference can be great, because they're like, this is awesome.
That's a good test group. That's a great test group.
The ones who are having to switch, that's going to be a dance for the women who are running phase 2, as you know. It sounds like you've already introduced the ideas.
I haven't had any.
I don't have the books yet. So that's January. I mean, I know I have them myself, but for my group.
They Lori has them.
Yeah, so like starting in January, we have those. But
Just so the men, just so that they all know, these are the 2 workbooks for the Healing Women's Group now. This one comes first. It's the Rhythm of Healing. It talks a lot about trauma, help the women get grounded. And this one is Kim's condensed version. That's sort of like the book she's publishing. And
well,
it's
a lot of
just
this
for
is
SABR.
inside that book, so don't let anybody copy it. Get me in trouble.
Yeah. Did you say, switching gears here just for a second, Kim, that you and Rob, stuff with Rutledge, that people are going to be able to take the stuff out of the Rutledge book and use it without?
Yeah, I decided, that was my decision. We decided that if you purchase the book, you're going to have an online portal to download any of the worksheets. Any therapist who wants them. Not all of this is in the book, so some of this is proprietary to us, but some of it is.
But the Rutledge stuff that you're talking about, we can get a hold of and not worry about copyright.
Yes, anything that will be online once the book comes out.
I'm sure we'll all want a copy. And you could sign it.
Sign it.
Yeah. Well, I think I get 10.
You get a book signing.
They give you 10, or maybe one. I hardly get any. They hardly give you any. But whatever.
Money.
I don't know anything about it. But we did decide to make that available so they don't have to buy a separate workbook. They can, if they bought the book, they can go online and just download any of the worksheets that are included in the man. Because we embedded the workbook into
That's
really
When does it
nice.
release, Kim?
I don't know the exact date, but April.
So that means August.
So excited.
I don't know about it.
Famous.
Well, yeah.
She's famous.
No.
Okay.
So,
All right.
do you guys have any questions of me of the women's, the changes, anything that you're concerned about, anything I can answer? If you do, don't tell me now. Tell me later. Whatever.
I think it's a great shift in dynamics with all the new research. It'll be awesome. I haven't had any complaints come to the top so far, so usually I am the last one.
I have a
haven't
question
really-
about content.
Yes.
Do we teach about like the punishments and then the abusive part of what would be considered like expressing the emotions? I'm just not.
What do you mean?
I'm just curious. I feel like
About when the partner's abusive to the
when
addict?
The partner's abusive to the addict. Is that the education piece there, or?
I can come up with something to give you. It's not in this stuff, but it was something that just popped in at the last minute in my head. I happen to know a couple of couples that I feel like the wife is so incredibly verbally and emotionally abusive to her partner.
You know, one of the things I've done in my group kind of organically is for them, and we've talked about this, right? And that is that continuum of safety seeking behaviors and what's healthy and what's not. And then I even had them just in group one night do kind of the 3 circles like the addicts, and in that center circle they have to put down the safety seeking behaviors that are kind of like bottom lines, that if you cross that, right, it's abusive. Right?
So we don't call them not sober. We don't go into addict language, but
We
you
don't,
know,
but for them it's just kind of, it helped them organize, hey, this is what I'm not supposed to do. Here's letting me know I'm moving into that zone.
yes,
And here's what I should be doing.
I like
This
that.
is the kind of safety seeking that I really should be doing.
Right.
And it just worked well. It resonated with the women. 'Cause
I like that.
They could really they could see it on paper,
Yeah.
right?
Practical.
I like that.
good.
And so I thought that was just really helpful, because then they've identified, I know that I do this, and that's now a bottom line. Just like we ask the addicts to have, bottom lines that they don't cross.
Yeah,
I
that's
do
good. I
think
You
like
should too.
I do think in our effort
Yeah.
to, obviously we've really changed so much of the language and taken all the blaming off of the partner, but it doesn't give he or she permission.
Right.
Either one, if they're abusing each other in any way, they're going to damage themselves and the relationship. So, and she'll feel bad about herself anyway, just like an addict does. She's going to have remorse, and then it'll show up as shame, and then she's going to. So, I want that. I just know, because I've watched it over the years, and we don't want to justify those behaviors just because you've been betrayed. We understand why you're angry. We understand why you want to lash out, why you want retribution, we understand that, but we still want to do what's healthy for you, even if you leave the relationship. Because so I think however we have to word that to help keep them in their window of tolerance, understand when they're stepping out.
So
And-
unhealthy behaviors?
Well, I think we remove the blame,
Accountability.
but add the accountability. So
Mhm.
healthy
It's gotta go both
accountability
ways.
behaviors look like this.
Safety seeking is what we usually
Yeah.
call them. That is her effort. That's why she's doing it most of the time.
Yeah.
If she shames him enough and calls him a bastard enough, then he's not going to act out because he's going to be scared of her. So,
And the approach I use is their safety seeking is going to contribute to more disconnection, right, and cause damage to the attachment.
or call him a pervert, or tell him you're like
And
Jeffrey
those that are
Epstein,
gonna,
or whatever.
we
you
can
know.
do that will kind of help you feel more safe, secure, and create connection.
And then you ask, you do reality therapy. So has it helped so far? Has he stayed sober because you're very unkind?
And it helps a lot of my partners to realize they're actually hurting themselves. They're stepping outside their
Yeah.
own integrity.
I love
Yeah.
that.
So that I just bring it back to them.
I love that.
We can do whatever, but we are going to stay within our own integrity. We're going to come through this beautifully with grace. Let's figure this
Let's
out.
figure it out. You have a right to your anger, but how
Yeah.
we express
good
it,
language.
how we. I love staying in your integrity.
Yeah.
I can see. I'm like,
Yeah.
that's a worksheet.
Yeah.
That's a
Yeah.
We're always creating worksheets.
Culturally, I think we've done this whole thing about expressing yourself to the point we say rage is okay,
Oh,
and
gosh.
just like, no, it's not.
It's not okay.
And they need to understand rage. Partners rage a lot.
Right.
And there is a piece in here on rage.
Yeah.
And
We used to talk in phase 1 more when the 3 of us were doing a lot of phase 1s, and I had written a whole blog article on bashing versus venting. And it's kind of the same thing. The women think that they're venting when really they're contributing to the whole. They're bashing. It's man bashing. They're just upset, and then everybody's all worked up, not venting.
Common enemy.
That's why we did this first. They're so dysregulated. We want to teach them how to ground and all first. They do this first so they can bring that down. So when they're doing this work, and it might be a little more difficult to stay in their window of tolerance, we can back them up and help them understand where they're stepping outside of that or what they need to do to get back in that window of tolerance. So we're just giving them the tool before we unleash, something that might
Yeah, that's good.
Cool.
Yeah.
We're excited about it. If you guys, it's going to be an ongoing evolution. So sorry, but I've known this for when we did Prodependence. I thought, I know our phase 3 family of origin stuff is still codependent. That's codependency model, but we have, it's a slow change. I feel like this was a big turn, and it should be our last big turn for a little while as far as but I think it's in the long run they're going to be so much better off.
It was easy for us to make some of these terms because as a program we were already sort of in touch with some of these little issues, and we're sort of making them happen anyway. Like some of the Lifestar workbooks, we stopped using some of those for the women because they were not helping some of them.
Yeah.
And so we were already using language that was prodependent instead of codependent. It just wasn't a term. It just wasn't out there. So some of the other agencies have had a harder time with it because they maybe weren't as in touch with it all. But it's been really easy, and it's nice now to have sort of a label to put on the whole concept, and it fits so much better.
It fits better. It fits a lot better. And I'll just go ahead and say this in front of Kim, because we have Kim as an expert, and we should view her as an expert on this. Because we have her as an expert, it puts us ahead, and it puts us doing a lot of test work, I think, that other groups will be doing in the coming years.
We really are. There are colleagues, you guys don't always know this, but there are colleagues that will call and ask, how are you doing this? How are you doing that? Just because of some of the listservs that we're on, and Kim is on and talking to people.
And Debbie and Matt, some of these people. So this is the other thing. There are some Prodependent-based supports out there. Don't forget to offer them to your partners. There's Prodependence.org. Rob and I started a whole 12-step model, support model that isn't traditional addict look. There's also Wetonglin, an excellent all Prodependence-based online support system. There's all of Rob's free stuff online that people can use. So if they say, well, I can't find a groupie, I can. Here's these resources outside of family strategies that's available. There are 2 or 3 that are excellent.
Yeah.
So, and there are groups in the rooms. I think they're starting 1 or 2 as well. So they're starting. It's just taking a minute.
It'll take a little time.
So hopefully the clients don't think anything of all, it's not bumpy to them at all. It's a nice smooth transition, nice smooth change. This is the format for January.
And can I just say, thank you so much for listening to me rant on and on about all the things I want to change. And Debbie and Julie for implementing and just jumping in and helping, because I just can't thank you guys enough for your generosity there, and it's part of my growth too, so I really, really appreciate it. Our team here, I know we say this, but you guys are so freaking awesome. And I listen. I get a lot of people call, how do you implement this? Help me do it. And I'm listening to their struggles. I'm like, I don't know.
We're light years ahead.
I just have good people.
Yeah.
I don't know what to say.
Well, part of that too is everybody's
a
team. Everybody works together and asks questions. And even Abby, who's not in SABR, she's here contributing.
Tolerating our 2 hours.
Even Abby.
Tolerating.
Just scrolling Instagram, amazing. So
Our girl sucks again.
What's that?
Everybody needs to explore their fantasies, so I
Abby's like, so thank you.
Thank you.
think it has something to do with holiday sweaters.
I like
I think because it's so second nature to us, we've been immersed in it, we don't realize how unique we are.
Mm-hmm.
I think
Because
that's
we're in
true.
it.
And
I think
so
that's
that's
true.
kind of been my experience in doing that webinar, is the fact that we're really the very first place
We're it.
ever
In
that
the
has
world.
taken in the world the Prodependence model and put it into practice.
I used to
Women.
feel that way when we would go to Lifestar, and people are coming up to all of us, how do you guys do that? Like revolving groups, for example.
That was amazing to me. They never got that.
They never got,
and I would
How we could enter
and we just talk about it like it's just how you do it.
Never got it.
And they're like, they don't know how you do that. So, we would go, and it was a good contrast. You guys probably don't remember. Anyway.
We're really unique that way, and we have and everybody knows what we're doing. Deb took over my webinar on Fridays on the Seeking Integrity site, and she's got quite a following. You see on We Tonglin, they follow. You know, they talk about what happens and what Matt says and his and people. It's a buzz. It's a huge buzz, and it's going to be a hard ship to turn, but it's amazing to be the first in the
fun.
front. It's also hard.
Fun to watch.
But it's good. So
I'm
thanks, you guys.
excited because I was one of your earlier people who went through that whole original program, and so I'm so excited to see the changes and be. Thank you for letting me be a part of this. I just can't.
It'll
tell
probably
you
come
how
naturally
excited.
to you, I'm sure.
We're glad you're with us.
Well, thank you. I'm so thrilled to be here. I can't.
And it'll be good to get your feedback too, because you went through the program. It'll be good to know how you perceive the new
Well,
changes.
listening to all the things that you're talking about have brought up so many different. The whole empathy thing that you were talking about a while ago, why you're so limbic in the trauma. I'll never forget, if you don't mind me sharing for 2 seconds. You sat in session with us one time, and something happened. I can't even remember what the situation was, and you excused Chad for a minute, and then you said something to me like, "Have you ever stopped to think about what this experience has been for him?" And that was truly one of the most transformative moments I had in my whole process, because I was so stuck in my woe is me, you know, I did everything right. Why? I mean, I did all the things. Why am I going through this? You know, why did you do this to me? You know, and once I could finally get my head around that, and then I had a conversation with him about it, everything changed. Like I said to him, I can't imagine how hard this must be for you. Yeah. And he just was like, what? I mean, the tears, and it was the vulnerability between us at that point went on a completely different trajectory. But I didn't know how to get there. I didn't even think about it. I was so frontal trauma, poor me, how am I dealing with my kids? What's this gonna do to my kids? You know what I mean? And so finally understanding that empathy was a piece, like a vital piece in the healing, was so huge. And so I've shared that with people and just along the way. And I feel like that, I mean, in the beginning, it's hard to say that because you're like, screw that. I don't care about what's going on with him. Look what he did to me, you know. But the time, as you go through time and the healing, it's quite astounding how that changes things, and it's made all the difference in our marriage.
That's awesome.
Can I add a piece to that?
Yeah.
You know, this new group I started, I've got a visitor for 2 months from the earlier group, the 6 p.m. group. She's coming in. And one of the first things she shared was that in her first aid kit, she put a picture of her husband as a child.
Oh.
Because in her mind, she goes, when I look at that, it reminds me that there is a wounded little boy in there and that is why he's got this addiction. The next week, everybody came back with their first aid kits. Guess what's in there? Pictures of their husbands when they were younger, when they were vulnerable, because it's making them look at them through a different lens.
That's good. I
And
like
there
that.
is there's a reason why they have an addiction, and it's wounding.
And it wasn't just I'm going to hurt everybody, you know, I'm going to hurt
I know.
but I love
should
that,
do
and I
that.
think that empathy induction is so important for both.
It really is.
Yeah.
It really is.
For both. So
Yeah.
thank you for
We should
sharing.
do that with the tribe boys for themselves.
Well, that's the first thing I have
Yeah,
my
that
addicts
would be
do.
a
People is
good
put a picture of their little boy on their phone on their lock screen.
Okay, all right. Let's wrap all this up. There are exercises. We won't practice these today, but these are 5 things you should all know how to do for the Healing Women's Group, Band of Brothers, Tribe, Men's Phase 3, every group except Phase 1 and Phase 2 men.
Yeah.
And it's the doubling, the role reversals, empty chairs, inner voice dialogues, and warm-ups. So we'll practice those. We'll start practicing those in January. So especially you guys know how to integrate those pieces and do that.
Those are movement pieces. They're experiential stuff.
They're psychodrama based, very classic psychodrama, and it's easy to do them. So we'll start practicing those. Thank you everybody for doing this and being here for this little in-service. You can get some CSAT hours for today.
CSAT hours.
I know Abby's really hoping for that.
I think I'm just gonna get the CSAT.
I think you probably should.
Might as well.
Just do the first
You know,
one.
every ITAP conference I've been to for the past few years, they always have a family workshop. How to do family disclosures like you and I had done. And I could totally see you presenting there even if you're not a CSAT.
I also think it'd be so good to train our other, continue to train them, because everybody who works with kids is going to work with some of our parents.
Yeah.
They're dealing with this issue.
All right. Thank you all.
Merry Christmas.
We'll
We have
close.
things.
Merry Christmas. We have the
Party in the next room.
party in the next
Party.
room.
Well,
So
That'd
we'll
be good.
excuse to that.
Cause I'm hungry.
I'm gonna take
Yes.
this.
Eric?
We got lots of good
Just
food.
for-
Make sure you turn this off correctly.
Yeah, I mean,
Might take
we
me-
have to,
Because
yeah, to the
I got some
next
clients
one.
waiting
We have
30 minutes ago.
Yes.